Ya de inicio la partida. Perdón, ahí algo pasó. Necesitábamos una sesión como esta, una sesión positiva, ¿no? Una sesión para darnos ánimo, y por eso agradecemos mucho a nuestros invitados de hoy, a Claudio Ibáñez y a David Pott, que nos van a dar una visión de la más positiva en estos tiempos, educación positiva, y también Claudio nos va a hablar de nuestro lado luminoso, así que esperamos que en esta conversación podamos encontrar un poco para seguir trabajando en estos temas, ya que estamos aún con la pandemia y saliendo de a poco, así que yo creo que se viene muy bien conversar ahora un enfoque positivo, así que muchas gracias a la Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez por facilitar a nuestro invitado de hoy, a David Pott y a Claudio Ibáñez, y nada, les damos la palabra. Gracias a todos.
Gracias, Ale. Al final de las dos presentaciones va a haber un espacio para preguntas. A mí me toca presentar a Claudio. Claudio trabajó con los 33 mineros, así que ahí tuvo un trabajo muy en terreno sobre cómo trabajar el tema de lo positivo. Es fundador y director ejecutivo del Instituto Chileno de Psicología Positiva, y él nos va a dar una explicación muy de contexto y no demasiado extensa sobre qué es la psicología positiva y muy brevemente cuál es su aplicación en la educación. Así que, Claudio,
muy bien, muchas gracias, Sofía. Gracias por la invitación a los organizadores de este encuentro, y un agrado conocerte, David. Muchas gracias. Yo voy a apagar mi cámara para ahorrar bando de ancha, y voy a compartir un PowerPoint con ustedes para hacer esta breve introducción que me pidieron que hiciera a lo que es la psicología positiva y la educación positiva. Por favor, díganme si están viendo la presentación.
Sí, se ve.
¿El PowerPoint? Sí. Excelente. Entonces, bueno, 10 minutos nomás para ponernos en la misma plana del tema que vamos a conversar. Y yo me voy a referir a qué es la psicología positiva y qué es la educación positiva. Y luego escucharemos a David con toda su experiencia, larga experiencia que tiene, en una de las aplicaciones más contundentes y globales de la psicología positiva en la educación. Bueno, la psicología positiva, ¿cómo podemos definirla? Todos tenemos la experiencia, y es lo que comúnmente ocurre, que cuando las personas recurren a un psicólogo, cuando las organizaciones recurren a un psicólogo, cuando las escuelas recurren a los psicólogos, fundamentalmente es porque hay problemas que mejorar. ¿Y eso por qué? Porque de alguna manera la psicología convencional ha sido una ciencia experta en problemas, déficit, dificultades, porque el foco lo ha tenido puesto fundamentalmente en estos temas que están acá a la mano izquierda: emociones negativas, las debilidades, los déficits, lo que no está funcionando bien, cómo mejorar los desempeños deficientes, y un foco fuerte en el pasado. Cuando uno va al psicólogo, habitualmente comienza la entrevista, y esa entrevista termina en nuestros primeros años, en la infancia temprana, etc. Vamos hacia atrás. Bueno, la psicología positiva es fundamentalmente un cambio de foco. Y este cambio de foco es mirar aquellas cosas que son las opuestas, las emociones positivas, las fortalezas, las cosas que abundan en nosotros, lo que funciona bien en nosotros, enfocarse en los desempeños de excelencia y mirar el futuro y descubrir la importancia que tiene en nuestro comportamiento actual, no el pasado, sino la visión de futuro. Y este cambio lo hace la psicología positiva usando fuertemente el método científico. Y aquí también hay una diferencia con la psicología convencional, porque mucha de la psicología convencional, muchos de los enfoques de la psicología convencional son enfoques bastante especulativos, con poco asidero en las evidencias empíricas. Entonces la psicología positiva, que es una psicología basada en evidencias y que busca ser una psicología basada en evidencias, establece esas diferencias con la psicología convencional. Entonces, otra forma de definir la psicología positiva es decir que es el estudio científico, como a mí me gusta decirlo, del lado luminoso de las personas, de sus fortalezas, de sus emociones positivas, de los desempeños de excelencia. Ahora, la psicología positiva, que parte el año 98 con el discurso de Martin Seligman en la APA, solicitando e impulsando este cambio de foco, ha logrado construir en prácticamente 20 años todo un marco teórico acerca del comportamiento humano. En primer lugar, explicitar y apoyarse en premisas positivas acerca del ser humano. La tendencia al funcionamiento óptimo, la tendencia a ir a más, la tendencia a salir de las dificultades, de ponerse de pie frente a las adversidades, etc. Y esas son creencias fundamentales de la psicología positiva. El otro elemento que constituye marco teórico es la teoría de las fortalezas. ¿Qué plantea la teoría de las fortalezas? Varias cosas, pero entre ellas las más importantes que pueden tener mucha relevancia para la educación es que todas las personas tenemos fortalezas, todos los niños tienen fortalezas, y que cuando construyen sobre estas fortalezas, indudablemente se mueven en dirección hacia el funcionamiento óptimo, hacia los desempeños de excelencia, hacia los niveles superiores de bienestar. Las emociones positivas, cuya teoría bastante preclara se la debemos a Barbara Fredrickson, sostiene que cuando las personas estamos bajo el influjo de emociones positivas, el optimismo, el entusiasmo, la confianza, la perseverancia, la persistencia, entonces afloran en nosotros nuestras mejores cualidades. En realidad, las emociones positivas incrementan nuestros recursos intelectuales, nuestros recursos sociales, nuestros recursos psicológicos. Las emociones positivas nos transforman en super hombres y en super mujeres. Otro punto importante del marco teórico que tiene la psicología positiva tiene que ver con el tema de la felicidad. ¿Y qué se plantea aquí? Que la felicidad genera en nosotros desempeños exitosos. Existe una primacía de la felicidad. Es decir, para avanzar hacia desempeños eximios, para avanzar hacia lo mejor de nosotros, eso implica primero incrementar en nosotros los niveles de nuestras emociones positivas. Un quinto planteamiento teórico importante es la teoría del bienestar. Bueno, hay varias formulaciones acerca del bienestar en psicología positiva, pero tal vez la que más se ha difundido es la de Seligman, que plantea que el bienestar está compuesto de 5 elementos, que los vamos a mencionar enseguida, y que los niveles altos de bienestar entonces promueven el funcionamiento óptimo de las personas. Finalmente quisiera mencionar la teoría de la autodeterminación de Ryan y Decci, que plantea algo bastante contraintuitivo. Lo que plantean estos autores es que las personas no necesitamos ser motivadas, que los alumnos en la sala de clase no requieren ser motivados. ¿Por qué? Porque el ser humano tiene 3 motivaciones innatas y universales. Y esas motivaciones, como la motivación hacia la maestría, la motivación hacia el mayor conocimiento, la motivación hacia las relaciones sociales, son motivaciones innatas, y la pregunta que tenemos que hacernos no es cómo motivamos a las personas, sino preguntarnos qué de lo que estamos haciendo está aplastando la motivación natural e innata que las personas tienen, que los alumnos tienen. Como ven ustedes, hay varias cosas que son completamente nuevas, muchas contraintuitivas en lo que es el enfoque teórico de la psicología positiva. Y preparé acá un gráfico que creo que resume bien, basado en la teoría del bienestar de Martin Seligman, lo que la psicología positiva sostiene, y creo que se aplica mucho a lo que es la educación. ¿Cuál es el planteamiento? Que el cimiento de todo está en las fortalezas. ¿Específicamente en qué? En que las personas ejercitemos y usemos nuestras fortalezas. Cuando hacemos eso, se incrementan los elementos del bienestar, que es este PERMA, que es el acrónimo P por emociones positivas, en inglés Positive Emotion, Engagement, que es involucramiento, relaciones positivas, Meaning, significado, la M, y Accomplishment, o logro. Y cuando estos elementos están presentes en un niño, en un adulto, en el profesor, entonces el nivel de bienestar es más alto y pueden alcanzar lo que la psicología positiva denomina el florecimiento, que es el estado o el alcanzar o al aproximarse a los niveles máximos de bienestar. Este enfoque de la psicología positiva, que es fundamentalmente un cambio de paradigma respecto a los planteamientos más convencionales del comportamiento humano, está teniendo aplicación en distintos campos, en la clínica, a nivel de las organizaciones, a nivel de la crianza de los menores, en el ámbito de la salud, con la psicología de la salud, a nivel de políticas públicas y, por supuesto, a nivel del tema que hoy día nos convoca, que es la educación positiva. Y específicamente, ¿por qué? Porque PERMA, que son los elementos del bienestar, emociones positivas, involucramiento, relaciones positivas, significado, logro, estos elementos son claves para ayudar a las personas a moverse hacia el funcionamiento óptimo, en forma individual, en forma de grupos, de equipos y de organizaciones. ¿Qué es la educación positiva? La educación positiva no es hacer que los niños se anden sonriendo, no es contar chistes, no es ni siquiera golpear la espalda de los alumnos, sino que la educación positiva, ¿de qué se trata? Se trata de aplicar los hallazgos, los conceptos, los fundamentos, las teorías, las estrategias y las herramientas que la psicología positiva ha venido desarrollando y usar este bagaje de herramientas en los ambientes educacionales. Esa es la forma en que yo defino educación positiva. Pero hay una definición más clásica, ¿cierto? Que es definir la educación positiva como la mezcla entre la enseñanza académica más convencional junto con lo que es el desarrollo del carácter y del bienestar. ¿Y por qué se habla de educación positiva? Bueno, porque desde el punto de vista científico, las herramientas más potentes para el desarrollo del carácter y el incremento del bienestar son las que provienen desde la psicología positiva. Y la psicología positiva, entonces, en estos programas de educación positiva, privilegia, enfatiza el desarrollo de destrezas que tienen que ver con el optimismo, la resiliencia, el engagement en los alumnos. Y esta educación positiva se basa en ¿qué? En los conceptos de bienestar y de funcionamiento óptimo. La psicología convencional lo que intenta es que las personas no tengamos problemas, que se atenúen las emociones negativas, los trastornos de ansiedad, etc. Lo que la educación positiva intenta es mover a las personas hacia los desempeños de excelencia. Pionero en estos programas de educación positiva, desde mi punto de vista, es el programa de resiliencia que Martin Seligman en los años 90 desarrolló con escuelas públicas en Pensilvania. El libro de referencia está ahí para los que quieran consultarlo, porque es una iniciativa tremendamente pionera en educación, que es instrumentalizar a los alumnos con herramientas como la resiliencia y el optimismo. Otro programa señero en educación positiva está constituido por el trabajo de las escuelas KIPP en Estados Unidos. Las escuelas KIPP, ¿qué han hecho? Bueno, mezclar el aprendizaje académico con las fortalezas de carácter. Partieron siendo 2 escuelas en Nueva York, fundadas en 1994, y hoy día alcanzan a 255 escuelas que están prácticamente en todos los estados de Estados Unidos. Y trabajando las fortalezas de carácter, las escuelas KIPP tienen unos tremendos números, porque acá voy a mostrar un par de gráficos. A la izquierda aparece, fíjense, el porcentaje de estudiantes que iniciaron la universidad y el porcentaje de estudiantes que está en la columna izquierda es un 78% de las escuelas KIPP, que se compara con un 46% de las escuelas de bajos ingresos y un 66% el promedio nacional en Estados Unidos. Las escuelas KIPP son escuelas que equivalen a escuelas subvencionadas en Chile, son escuelas que reciben apoyo del Estado, pero son escuelas que son conducidas por particulares, pero además las escuelas KIPP son todas escuelas que se ubican en barrios de bajos ingresos, en barrios extremadamente vulnerables. Miren los resultados, 78% de sus alumnos, un promedio por arriba del resto de los colegios equivalentes en nivel socioeconómico, y también por arriba del promedio de Estados Unidos. Y los alumnos que cursan 4 años de universidad, es decir, que prácticamente terminan sus carreras, también el porcentaje de las escuelas KIPP está muy por sobre sus colegios equivalentes desde el punto de vista del nivel socioeconómico, pero fíjense que iguala al promedio nacional en Estados Unidos. Y la otra gran experiencia, de la cual David, por supuesto, nos va a ilustrar, es la experiencia de la Geelong Grammar School en Australia. A mí esta experiencia siempre me ha llamado mucho la atención, porque aquí no se han hecho intervenciones específicas, sino que se ha tomado el colegio completo, total, y ese colegio en forma completa, sistémica, está siendo gestionado con las herramientas de la psicología positiva, aplicando un modelo que permite que la psicología positiva impregne todo el funcionamiento de los alumnos, de los profesores. En una conversación con Martin Seligman, él me decía, mira, en la Geelong Grammar School, no solo el directorio y el board y las máximas autoridades y los profesores están impregnados con la psicología positiva, sino que también los jardineros. Es decir, todo el mundo ha pasado por un entrenamiento sistemático y está siendo permanentemente entrenado para poder aprender la psicología positiva, vivirla, enseñarla a los alumnos e impregnar a toda la organización con ella. Un reporte bastante potente de esto es el libro Educación Positiva, que está ahí. Me imagino que ya debe haber edición en español. Pero una cosa es importante, tanto las escuelas KIPP como la Geelong Grammar School, obviamente evalúan el impacto de la psicología positiva en lo que es el trabajo, la enseñanza y los resultados académicos y de desarrollo de los alumnos, pero no han logrado aislar el efecto de la psicología positiva, porque son organizaciones en funcionamiento y no son organizaciones dedicadas a la investigación científica. Pero desde el punto de vista científico hay un trabajo que lo hizo Adler, un alumno de Martin Seligman, en que tomó 3 países, Bután, México, Perú, fíjense, son más de 700 establecimientos educacionales con cerca de 800.000 alumnos, y bueno, aplicó un diseño experimental en que tomó grupos de alumnos que fueron pasados por un entrenamiento en psicología positiva, en bienestar, en entrenamiento en well-being, y grupos controles que no fueron tocados por este entrenamiento. Y transcurrido 15 meses, se obtuvieron resultados para comparar qué pasaba con los niveles de bienestar. Bueno, los niveles de bienestar en el grupo experimental, GE, obviamente eran mucho más altos, significativamente más altos esos niveles de bienestar que en el grupo control, constituido por aquellos alumnos que en estos colegios no pasaron por ese entrenamiento. Eso es como esperable, porque el entrenamiento era en bienestar. Sin embargo, llama poderosamente la atención que el rendimiento escolar de los alumnos que pasaron por el entrenamiento también fue superior al rendimiento escolar de aquellos alumnos que no pasaron por el entrenamiento. Entonces, la conclusión obvia es que el entrenamiento y la educación positiva, el incorporar y mezclar el entrenamiento en bienestar con el entrenamiento académico convencional, mejora el funcionamiento de los alumnos, pero también mejora el desempeño académico convencional. Bueno, eso es lo que yo tenía que decir y dejo con la palabra a Sofía.
Ahora sí. Bueno, muchas gracias, Claudio, por tu excelente resumen. La verdad que queda bastante claro. Creo que el concepto PERMA es algo que se va a permear en todos nosotros, porque era muy buena sigla como para resumir una idea compleja, ¿no? Pero a la vez súper interesante. Y me gustó también esto de que, más que buscar cómo motivar, buscar qué estamos haciendo que desmotiva. A mí me parece que la motivación de los estudiantes es lo que más está puesto en jaque cuando los estudiantes no tienen como una visión de futuro, de que sirve para algo, de que su esfuerzo en el fondo los va a llevar a alguna parte. Entonces, esas son cosas que me quedan dando vuelta de lo que tú hablas. Bueno, ahora me toca pasarle la posta a Paulina Ortiz. Ella es codirectora del Magíster en Psicología Positiva Aplicada del Adolfo Ibáñez. Nos ayudó mucho en poder tener este encuentro con David, y ella nos va a presentar a David, explicarnos un poco quién es y luego hablará David.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Sofía. Bueno, tengo el placer de poder introducir a David, que es un querido amigo que tuve la oportunidad de conocer en Australia. David es un reconocido conferencista, autor y consultor educativo que trabaja con organizaciones gubernamentales y algunas de las escuelas líderes del mundo para poder ayudar a orientar la visión y la estrategia de la promoción del bienestar en los contextos educativos. El libro más vendido de David, que ahí Alejandra le preguntaba al inicio que lo encontró de manera gratuita en Kindle, es 10 Things Schools Get Wrong and How We Can Get Them Right. David ha liderado proyectos importantes asociándose con organizaciones gubernamentales y no gubernamentales para integrar la ciencia del bienestar en los sistemas educativos de los Emiratos Árabes y Hong Kong. El actual trabajo de David se basa en sus 5 años como director asociado en el Instituto de Educación Positiva y 15 años de experiencia en la práctica docente en Australia y el Reino Unido, donde ha ocupado puestos de liderazgo. Bueno, sin más preámbulos, dejo con ustedes ahora para que podamos aprovechar de esta oportunidad de conocer sobre la promoción del bienestar, sobre todo en este periodo que es tremendamente fundamental, a David Wolf.
Thank you, Paulina. Gracias. Thank you so much. And hola to everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I'm calling from Melbourne, Australia. It's 7:30 in the morning here. But it's really fun to start my day with you. I wanted to thank Paulina for the introduction. Thank you, Sophia, for your words. Alejandra, for your introduction earlier. And Claudio, what a wonderful introduction to positive psychology. I think maybe, Claudio, I should just go back to bed and you can continue to share about positive education, positive psychology, because that was a perfect introduction to our work. Thank you very much. Can I just begin by asking how many of you have visited Australia? Can I ask you to raise your hand if you've visited Australia? 1, 2, 3, only 3, 4, 5. Please keep your hand up. Please keep your hand up, Diego. Have you eaten kangaroo? Have you eaten kangaroo? If you've eaten kangaroo, oh, only Paulina. See, Paulina is a true Australian, I think. Paulina pretends that she is Chilean, but I think really she is Australian. But please do come to visit after the pandemic. We would love to have you in Australia. You're very welcome to come and visit and eat kangaroo, but please don't eat koala. Koala is illegal. Please don't eat the koala bears. Let me share my screen with you. It's exciting for me to share this with you, especially after Claudio's introduction, which did such a great job of painting the picture for us about this field of wellbeing science that I've been involved in for more than 15 years now. But today, really, I'm going to be talking for the next 25, 30 minutes about this question here, wellbeing education or positive education. Does it really matter? Does it really matter? And especially now in the pandemic, does it really matter? Because there are many other educational priorities that matter. You know, where at the moment schools are trying to work out how do you teach math via hybrid methods. You know, how do we run a school? How do we make sure that our students are safe? How do we make sure we're teaching about consent and fundamental elements of adolescence? Like, there's so many things that schools are trying to do at the moment. How important is wellbeing education? Where I just wanted to introduce myself briefly, and Pauline has done this a little bit, but I am an author, a global education consultant. I've worked with over 1,000 schools around the world in the space of positive education. My job for the last 10 years really has been trying to help people, or help schools, place wellbeing science at the heart of education. I've also worked with the United Nations, and I currently consult with the UAE government as well on this work, this applied positive psychology. I sit on the PISA board, which is the Positive Education Schools Association in Australia as a director. I also sit on the Dubai Future Council for Education. I did, as Paulina said, I did work for nearly 10 years at Geelong Grammar School as the Associate Director at the Institute of Positive Education. I'm a Frisbee expert. That's my real skill. Do you know Frisbee? Diego, I'm not very good at football. I know you guys love your football. I'm not great at football, but I am good at Frisbee if you want to come and play with me. And I am the father of Hudson and Harper, my son and daughter, who are my passion really for this part, this field really is driven by my passion for my children and for students around the world. So this little talk today from me is broken up into 3 sections. We're going to talk about the past, positive education, wellbeing science. Where did it all begin in schools? Then we'll talk about where we're headed in the future, where we currently are, and then where we're headed into the future, the past, the present, the future. So let's begin here with the past. And this is a photograph of some of the work that Claudio was describing for us. On the left, we have Professor Martin Seligman, one of the most renowned psychologists of the last 50 years. I know Marty quite well. I've sat with him on boards. I've had many, many discussions with Marty about positive education, positive psychology. He is a wonderful man and a genius mind, a wonderful mind. But he's not an educator. He's not spent any time teaching students in classrooms. He doesn't fundamentally understand the way schools work because his expertise is different. And so he did create the field of positive psychology. But in 2006, he came to Geelong Grammar School. And this photo is taken in 2006. And he came to Geelong Grammar School to offer an experiment. Could we place wellbeing science, positive psychology at the heart of a school? Seligman did not want to just teach a curriculum. This was not just an SEL program. This was trying to place wellbeing science at the heart of a school to fundamentally shape the future of the school. The man on the right is Stephen Meek, who was the principal at Geelong Grammar in 2006. And this photograph was taken in my office where I worked for 10 years. But in this conversation, in this photograph, positive education was born. And it was born because Seligman asked this question here. What do you most want for your students? What do you most want for your students? And Stephen on the right answered the same way that every educator in the world answers. Stephen said, we want our students to flourish. We want our students to be well. We want them to contribute meaningfully to their world. Seligman asked a follow-up question. The question he said then is, so Stephen, tell me, what do you teach at Geelong Grammar School? And Stephen said, well, we teach maths, science, geography, history, and English. And Seligman said, so you don't teach wellbeing science? Stephen Meek, you can kind of see on his face this kind of worried expression because he's, I think, realizing that Geelong Grammar School, 150 years old, one of the world's leading schools, was not doing enough to try to leverage the emerging science of human happiness and human well-being. And so in this photograph, positive education was born. Stephen signed a large check. Marty Seligman came and lived at Geelong Grammar School for 6 months with his team, and we created the field of positive education. In 2008, as Claudio said, we started training all of our teachers, our faculty, our non-teaching staff, the administration support staff. The whole school became trained in wellbeing science. In 2009, we created the world's first curriculum in positive education, which borrowed from the Penn Resiliency Program that Claudio mentioned earlier. We took the Penn Resiliency Program and we created a much bigger program that covers the whole K through 12 spectrum. In 2013, we published in the International Journal of Wellbeing our applied framework for positive education, which is now being used by hundreds of schools around the world. In 2014, the Institute of Positive Education was created at Geelong Grammar School, and this is a work now that we've worked with over 1,000 schools, 20,000 students, 20,000 educators around the world to help share what we're learning about positive education. IPEN was also created in 2014. This is the global network of positive education schools, and I've sat on that advisory board as well. In 2015, the Institute, Geelong Grammar, started training schools around the world because people started to recognize that there was some excitement about what positive education could bring. In 2016, we were invited by the UAE, the United Arab Emirates government, to help them bring positive education to the whole country. And we've worked with Her Excellency Ahud al-Rumi, who was the Federal Minister of Happiness in the UAE. And we continue to work with her and her team. In 2017, at the World Government Summit, positive education was a mainstream of conversation. Governments from around the world talking about what positive education is about and why it matters. And I contributed to that paper, I think, that Claudio mentioned earlier about the state of positive education. In 2018, also we started to test. We knew that positive education worked in Australian settings, in British settings, in US settings, but we wanted to test, does positive education work in Islamic settings, in Jewish settings, in secular settings around the world? And we were able to run some real exciting experiments in these countries. And we found that, yes, it does. This work is universal. You know, you and I speak a different language, but we're all humans. And this is the science of human flourishing that we're trying to embed into schools. I'm currently continuing to do some work with Dubai around their wellbeing census. This is the largest wellbeing survey that's ever been done in the world. About 70,000 students in Dubai are part of this longitudinal study that we're looking at what works, what doesn't work, what can we learn about positive education. So there's a lot of work being done in the past. But I think as I talk about the past, the most important role that positive education, wellbeing science, wellbeing education has played is this. And I don't know if you've seen this photograph before. I'm sure probably you have, but this is a photograph that was taken in by the NASA astronauts back in when the initial Apollo missions were being launched. This was taken by William Anders during one of the Apollo missions. And this photograph has become known as Earthrise, not sunrise, but Earthrise. This was the first photograph of the Earth taken from the moon as it rose above the moon's horizon. And this photograph back in the 1960s changed our perception of Earth. You know, this was the moment we recognized how fragile Earth is. We recognize that, you know, really the planet that we are on is a tiny little ball of rock floating in the nothingness of space. And in this photograph, the modern environmental movement was created because people like you and me recognize that we need to do something to look after this tiny little fragile piece of rock. This caused the birth of the environmental movement. And this put really environmental thinking into the consciousness of normal people, of men and women around the world. One of the astronauts, Mike Collins, said this: oddly enough, the overriding sensation I got looking at the Earth was, my God, that little thing is so fragile out there. And I think what positive education has done, what wellbeing science has done, what the work of Seligman and others have done, is to put wellbeing science into the consciousness of educators around the world. In the same way that NASA photograph put environment into our consciousness, positive psychology, positive education has put well-being into our consciousness. This is my son, Hudson, when he was 3 years old, and he's going to a well-being school. This was actually taken when we were living in Dubai, doing some work over there, and he was going to a school called Sunmark School, which is one of the Middle East's leading positive education schools. He's 3 years old in that photograph, and already at the age of 3, he was being taught about character strengths, about kindness, about grit, about flow. He has a language of well-being that is way more sophisticated than most kids around the world because he's in a school that's focusing on this. So when we talk about well-being science, it puts it in the consciousness of educators, and not only in the consciousness of educators, but also in the consciousness of the child. And so Hudson has this kind of perception that the world is about people, that the world is about meaning, the world is about contribution, the world is about strengths. So I think the greatest contribution that all of this work has done in the past is to bring wellbeing science to the forefront of our thinking. The other cool thing about the past of positive psychology, positive education, is that we've generated hundreds and hundreds of studies. Claudio mentioned one specific study by our friend, Dr. Alejandro Adler, where we highlighted the impact that wellbeing can have in an experimental situation on both wellbeing and academic performance. So now we have very hardcore evidence that, yeah, positive education, when it's done well, can increase well-being, it can decrease ill-being, and it can increase academic performance when it's done well. We've also seen this same work at Geelong Grammar School, where I helped lead some research over the last 10 years to look at the impact at the school of Geelong Grammar. And we found similar findings, that students at Geelong Grammar School who have been exposed to wellbeing science through their whole life have a significant advantage in life satisfaction compared to students who are in similar schools who don't have access to wellbeing science. Now, this is a big advantage, right? So we're learning about what works. Really interestingly as well, we've kind of evolved positive education to understand that, yeah, positive education is about people. It is about process. It's about what we do in schools, but it's also about the environment, the place around the students. And this is some work we've been working with UNESCO on to help them bring this to life. The concept that positive psychology, positive education is not just about teaching skills and knowledge. It's about creating a whole environment in a school that nurtures the well-being of the whole community. And that's really important because psychologists refer to the concept of the hummingbird effect. And I don't know if you've heard of this concept before, but the hummingbird is a very strange animal. It's a very strange bird. It's the only bird in the world that can flap its wings forwards and backwards at the same time, and so it can hover. And one strength of being able to hover is that it can eat food from these very specific flowers. Now, I don't know if you know this about the hummingbird, but the hummingbird did not always have a long beak. The hummingbird formed that long beak because the food that it was eating started to change. About 100,000 years ago, the food that the hummingbird was eating started to change. So the flowers changed. And so because the environment changed, the hummingbird changed its physical appearance. When we change an environment, we change the animal. And the same thing is true in schools. When we change the environment, we change the human animal. The students, the teachers, the parents become different when we set up an environment that nurtures wellbeing science, that places wellbeing science at the heart of education. Martin Luther King said it this way: whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. This is the interrelated structure of reality. And this is the really hard work that we've been doing, because Marty Seligman, all of the scientists that Claudio mentioned, Dr. Carol Dweck and Fredrickson and Tal Ben-Shahar and Marty Seligman and Peterson, all these amazing minds, they're doing work in a scientific capacity in kind of sanitized laboratories. But our work as educators on the ground is to take that science, to translate it, and to bring it to life in a setting that is very different from a scientific laboratory. Schools are messy, beautiful, messy places where we have 4 generations of people in an unstructured way, where there are millions of variables each day. Schools are very different from scientific laboratories. And I think the hardest lesson we've learned in the past is that you cannot just take positive psychology and put it into a school because of the hyper-connected system that a school is. And so we've learned a lot about this, about the translation of science, about the interconnected, interrelated structure of schools, and how we can best translate the science into something that makes sense in schools. So all of this so far has been awesome. Like, what an amazing thing that positive psychology has helped transform schools around the world. But we've made a lot of mistakes too. Made a lot of mistakes. And I've been at the forefront of a lot of these mistakes. You know, we've spent millions of dollars in researching and embedding positive psychology at Geelong Grammar School. We've worked with thousands of educators and United Nations. Like, we've done a lot of amazing work, but it's pioneering work. Claudio used the word pioneer. It is pioneering, it's new. And because of that, we made mistakes, and we continue to make a lot of mistakes because this is hard. This work is amazing and it's hard. But maybe one of the biggest mistakes we made was about measurement. In the early days at Geelong Grammar School, we failed to take baseline data measurement at the start of POS-Ed. So we don't have any data from 10 years ago looking at the impact that's occurred. And then we made the opposite mistake. We started measuring too much. And now we have a real problem with survey burnout, with research burnout, where it's very hard to get high quality data from Geelong Grammar students because they've been over measured. We also have a problem with subjective well-being measurement. You know, I've seen this for the last 10 years. I've seen the problem with trying to measure subjective well-being of a 14-year-old boy. It's very, very hard to get data that makes sense, that we can really validate, because you're asking a 14-year-old boy to try and interpret his feelings and then put that into his mind and then put that onto paper to answer a question. And then you're asking him to be honest in answering that question. There are so many variables and biases that affect our measurement that we actually have very poor measurement, I think, overall, in terms of accurately measuring well-being. But this is changing, and I'll talk a little bit more at the end about biometrics and the future of measurement. Another mistake we made was around teacher impact. You know, we failed to recognize how important the teacher is in well-being science, in positive education. This is part of $1 million 3-year study that the University of Melbourne did at Geelong Grammar School, looking at our students and the efficacy of positive education. And what Melbourne University found, the researchers found at Geelong, is this: if you go into any school in the world and you ask a group of 50 9th grade students, how much do you enjoy or value math or science or learning English or physical education class? How much do you value that? You get a normal distribution, normal curve. Most students will say, I like math, 3 out of 5. Some students love math. Some students hate math, right? And so that's what we expect in any subject in the world. What we found in positive education is this graph here. We took a group of 50 10th grade students at Geelong Grammar School. We asked them, how much do you enjoy or value positive education lessons? And we got this inverted graph. Half the students hated POS-Ed, half of them loved it. None of them said it was just okay. And when we saw this data, we thought there was a flaw in the data. We couldn't understand this data. But then when the researchers went back and had a look at, interrogated the data further, they found, I don't know if you can guess this, but the students on the left, they all had the same teachers. The students on the right, a different group of teachers. And so what we found is that the curriculum, even though the curriculum was exactly the same, the curriculum didn't matter, actually, about how much the students enjoyed or valued it. It was all to do with the teacher. So we failed to recognize that, and we've done a lot of work to try and fix that. Here's another mistake we made. We didn't translate the science enough. You know, in the early days, we just tried to take positive psychology findings and teach it to kids. That doesn't work because, as I've said earlier, that science and schools are so different, philosophically different. And so we failed to really do the work of translation. You know, Marty Seligman, you know, a mentor, friend, like a genius, but he knows nothing really about teaching 14-year-old boys how to be more gritty or how to be kind, right? That's the work of educators who are the world-class experts in teaching. And so educators really have to see themselves as more important than Seligman. Seligman and his team and all the positive psychology researchers doing some amazing research, but the educator is the expert. The educator is the expert in education. They're the only expert in education because they've done thousands and thousands of hours of practice of educating kids, right? So we've had to rebalance that kind of hierarchy. This is another mistake we made, that we did well-being to students instead of with them, which is a problem. And we didn't bring them along the journey with us enough. The final problem I think we've learned from in the past is that we failed to embrace parents as partners in the process. Unfortunately, people like me, idiots like me, thought that we could just create a curriculum, teach it to students, and then kind of just tell parents what we were doing, which works with geography and math and science teaching, but it doesn't work with well-being because the parents care more about the child than the teachers do. The parents are more involved in the life of the child. The parents spend more time with the child, often with the child. And so the parents are more important than the teachers in this whole well-being thing, right? And we fail to recognize the importance of parents in the picture, we've tried to rectify that. So that's the past, right? That's what we've learned really so far about positive education, wellbeing science in schools. We end up here in 2021 in the middle of a global pandemic. We're at the present moment now, right? The present moment. And this is where I think we have to think differently. We have a different world. You know, you and I are living in a world that will never be the same. The pandemic has shifted the world. It will never be the same again. What we have is here's some current data that we're showing from around the world. 34% of young Australians report high or very high levels of distress right now. This is a 300% increase since 2007. Now, Australia is a beautiful, lucky country with high levels of resource, very high socioeconomic status, and we've got more than a third of our students living with very high levels of distress. 46% of Americans are currently evaluating their life as thriving in 2020, which is a 15% drop in the last 2 years, the lowest since the global financial crisis. Less than half Americans are enjoying their life. 74% of all UK education professionals experienced behavioural, psychological, or physical symptoms due to their work last year during the pandemic. 3/4 of all British teachers are unwell. 75% of adolescents in your beautiful part of the world in Latin America have had to ask for help regarding their mental well-being during the pandemic. This is new research that's come out of UNICEF. It's 3/4 of your students have had to ask for help with their mental and physical well-being because of the pandemic. Like, this is not good. We're not in a good place right now. But here are 3 good things that we've just recognized kind of right now that we're learning. Here's number 1. It comes from a brand new study just published out of the University of Melbourne by colleague Professor Lee Waters, that's finding that stress-related growth is visible in students that have a positive education background. So in this study, Professor Waters, her team looked at a school in Sydney who have a powerfully embedded positive education program, and they found that those students, many of them actually were found to be doing very well, in fact, flourishing in spite of the pandemic. And a lot of that variance in capacity was due to positive education lessons. So positive education can help buffer students against the worst effects of crises like we're in, but it can also help students grow despite challenge, right? So that's exciting. Positive education seems to be able to help students in these very difficult times. Here's another really good thing that's happening. Researchers around the world, like Professor Carol Dweck, who's an incredible researcher out of Stanford, and who came up with her theory of mindset is the most impactful theory of all, really, that's impacted mainstream education from positive psychology. We're starting to recognize that science can't just be put into schools. You can't just teach students the science. You have to translate the science. You have to transform the environment. You have to bring students with you. You have to involve parents. And people like Carol Dweck herself are starting to recognize this. And this is what she said recently, that in the beginning, as I freely admitted, we didn't recognize the complexity of mindset interventions in schools. She said, yeah, look, we thought you could just teach kids about mindset. It doesn't work. In a large study 2 years ago, the National Study on Learning Mindset, Carol Dweck's own study in the US, 12,000 students, found that mindset has no impact. Mindset doesn't have any impact in mainstream education settings in terms of elevating grades. So mindset doesn't work in the way she thought it was going to work. And that's because schools are not scientific laboratories, right? But that's cool. We're starting to learn. Researchers are recognizing this. And here's the third thing at the present that I think is really cool. The good thing that's happening right now is that we're realizing that a focus on leveraging the system for sustainable change. You know, positive education is not about teaching skills and knowledge to students. It's not ultimately about teaching positive psychology skills and knowledge. It's about creating change. It's about transforming school environments. It's about empowerment of teachers and students and parents, right? And we're recognizing this. Positive psychology, positive education, as Claudio mentioned, has created a possibility of a better human, a happier human. But now we're also creating a process of enrollment, allowing parents and students and teachers to enroll in the process of bringing this to life. We recognize that you can't just teach these skills to students. You've got to empower students. You've got to create an environment which nurtures this. So we're recognizing now that we need the science to help us see what's possible. But then as educators, we've got to do the work of creating a system of enrolling people in the process, making it easy for people to get on board with this. So we come to the last little section here, which is about the future, where we're headed. Where's next? Where are the next steps going? And I think this is very exciting. This question, you know, in the middle of the pandemic, or hopefully towards the end of the pandemic, maybe, is how can we get schools back to normal? That's the wrong question to ask. Schools will never be back to normal. The question we're needing to ask now into the future is, what is the purpose of schooling now? In the middle of a post-industrial age, a post-internet age, in a hyper-connected digital world, post-pandemic, why are schools here? Because they're not here to teach math anymore. They're not here to teach reading and writing. Because my son has been home during the pandemic, learning on Khan Academy to read and write. We don't need schools to teach students to read and write. So why do we have schools now? What is their purpose? And if we don't answer this question, we're going to end up like Blockbuster Video. Remember how powerful Blockbuster Video was 20 years ago? One of the most powerful organizations on the planet disappeared. Remember this? Remember these photo print? Do you have these in Chile? These photo printing stores where you take your little film in and get them processed 20 years ago? Disappeared overnight. Remember these? Public payphones? Gone. They're gone because they didn't evolve. You know, those things used to be in every city, in every town, in every village in the world. You used to have a video shop, a film processing place, a payphone and a school and a pub maybe. And now we just have a pub and a school. Those other things have gone. Schools are there for now, but if we don't ask this question, we will very quickly realize that schools are redundant as well. So what is the purpose of schooling now? I think it's this. This is the Sustainable Development Goals. You know, I think as humans, we've come together to describe where we want to be as a species in the next 20, 30 years. So in my mind, this is the purpose of school. Now, the purpose of school is to bring young people together, to inspire and equip them to work together to solve interesting, important problems. School is not there to teach reading and writing. School is there to do this, to help students solve interesting, important problems in the future. And that is why wellbeing education matters. Because if we don't equip students personally with social emotional skills, then they won't be able to help us build a better world. And so where we get to is that positive education is evolving from the work Seligman did 20 years ago. It still matters, but we've evolved positive education to be much more focused on whole-rounded, well-rounded students that can help understand and solve problems together. And so we end up with the future that is the future of wellbeing science is this. It's asset-based education, or strengths-based education, as Claudio called it. It's about this too. It's about adaptive, personalized learning. This is recognizing that each child is unique and individual. And I know that, you know, your foundation, the BHV Foundation, the Digital Education Network particularly, is focused on innovation and technology to help evolve education. What we're seeing is that, you know, SATs in the US are gone. Standardized testing in Australia is disappearing. And what we're seeing is the gradual increase of adaptive personalized learning. We're also seeing the unbundling the role of the teacher. Teachers currently are not really teachers in Australia and Chile. They do a bit of teaching, but they're also mental health workers, and they're administrators, and they're economists, they're budget holders, and they're politicians trying to sell messages about school, and they're bureaucrats. You know, teachers do so many things, but we're also now starting to see a shift back post-pandemic to teachers being able to do what they're best at, which is teach students, right? Which is exciting, I think, for the future. We're also seeing individualized credential pathways and some amazing work that I'm working on with a large organization based out of the UK to look at micro-credentialing. This is happening now. It's going to happen in the future. We're going to have blockchain-based credentialing that is going to be allowing students to see knowledge as currency. You know, when you and I went to school, the certificate we got was currency. We had to finish 12th grade, and then we had to go to university, get a certificate. That was the currency that we needed. That's disappearing. We're going to see individualized credential pathways where students can be recognized for their individual talents and not forced to just get a certificate. We're rethinking school structures. Wellbeing science now is helping us understand how we can think radically differently about schools. Like, why do schools have to start at 8 o'clock in the morning and finish at 3 o'clock? Can one student go to multiple schools? Why not? Can one teacher teach at multiple schools? Can we continue to do hybrid learning because it works for some students? You know, we're really radically rethinking the structures of schooling. And we also have this, that Hollywood meets Harvard, where we have world-class educators on YouTube now. I mean, many of the Harvard professors, many of Geelong Grammar's teachers now have their own YouTube channels, right? Where you can watch some of the best educators in the world without needing to go to Harvard or Geelong Grammar School. So we're seeing this shift where there's a democratization of high quality learning. All of this is leveraging your vision that your network has of taking technology and bringing it more broadly across Latin America, and using technology as a leverage point to empower students and teachers. It's very, very exciting, but wellbeing science has to be at the heart of it. Because ultimately, all of this technology that you're interested in must be in the service of a better world, right? I'm going to end here. Just want to share one final reason why the future is a positive wellbeing science is about individualized pathways. And that's because of this. There are 24 identified character strengths that are universal across time and space. And this comes from the VIII Institute, from work Marty Seligman, Chris Peterson did 20 years ago. What we see is these are consistent across all cultures, in Australia, in China, in Chile. Prudence, forgiveness, kindness, honesty, all of these are highly valued strengths of character, right? 24 of them. I have a unique set, a unique list, a unique ranking. Sophia has a unique ranking of these. I happen to have zest, playfulness, and teamwork as my top 3. Sophia, Alejandra, Claudio all have different rankings. And do you know how many different rankings there are of these 24 character strengths? Do you know how unique we are as humans? I don't know if there are any maths geeks, maths nerds. Look like, Diego, you're doing some maths there. I don't know if you're trying to work out. But the answer to this question is 24 factorial, right? This is how many different combinations there are. Do you know what the answer to that question is? What is 24 factorial? The answer is 1 trillion different combinations. There are 1 trillion different combinations of character strengths. That's how unique we are. And so the idea of well-being education being delivered en masse, like to all students at once, is crazy. The future of well-being education is about individually harnessing the unique strengths of every child. That 1 trillion combinations means that Diego, who's with us today, if we knew his 24 character strengths in order, it will take another 8 trillion generations before we will get another Diego that has the same list. That's how unique we are, right? And this is kind of where we get to at the end. This is why I'm so excited about where we're going with wellbeing science, is this. The students who feel they are known, when we really know the unique child, when they feel they belong, they learn better, perform better, feel better, behave better. They don't do this because we're teaching positive psychology. They do this because we know them. We're harnessing their unique strengths. We're empowering the child. So of course they learn better, perform better, feel better, behave better. Interestingly too, teachers who feel they are heard and that they belong are 4 times more likely to do their best in their workplace. So this is not just about students, it's also about the teachers, the educators, the environment around them. And when we get this right, we supercharge our schools, right? This is why I'm so excited about the future of wellbeing science and the impact it's going to have on education going forward. So let me please just say thank you to Paulina, my very good friend, for the invitation. Thank you to all of you for allowing me just to share a little bit of my work. I hope there's been something there that's been interesting or exciting for you. But most of all, I wanted to say thank you for the work you do. I know you people are all very highly experienced, educated, busy people with millions of things you could be doing, but you are giving up your time to help create a better, happier, healthier world, a better, happier, healthier Chile. And I love the work you're doing. It's very, very inspiring. Thank you for the opportunity. If you'd like to connect with me, my details are there. That's my new book that some of you have got hold of already. And so there's a lot more information about how I see the future of education going. And if you're interested, I didn't mention this, but I'm currently co-founder of a wellbeing startup based in Oklahoma in the US called VIII, which is an immersive 3D game where we're teaching wellbeing science in a gaming environment, particularly for low socioeconomic students that have access to games, but maybe don't have access to world-class schools. So have a look at vitally.com, doing some really interesting things there with technology. Thank you so much. So fun to hang out with you guys. I'm going to stop sharing. I'll hand back over. Thank you.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, David. Muy inspiradora la exposición. Se queda uno pensando muchas cosas. Ahora viene el espacio para preguntas. Le vamos a dar la palabra primero a Claudio y después vayan avisando en el chat los que quieran hacer preguntas y yo voy a ir coordinando para que todos tengan la oportunidad de hacer comentarios, preguntar o lo que quieran.
Bueno, gracias David por tu brillante exposición. Cuando hablamos de educación positiva, nosotros estamos con la psicología positiva desde el año 2001 en Chile. Trajimos a Chile a Martin Seligman el 2011, hemos traído a Bárbara Freire, con Sonja Ludomirki, y hay, yo sé, porque algunas de esas personas han pasado por nuestro instituto, algunas iniciativas en Chile, especialmente creo de escuelas KIP, y me da la impresión que hay algunos asistentes acá que están conectados con las escuelas KIP. La pregunta es la siguiente. Las escuelas KIP en muy pocos años, porque son muy pocos años, digamos, llegan de 2 a ser prácticamente 250 escuelas en Estados Unidos. Lo mismo ha ocurrido en otros países. La experiencia de la Geelong Grammar School, este colegio que de manera integral abraza la psicología positiva, la consulta es, ¿cuáles son las claves para que eso pueda ocurrir? Porque una de las cosas que ocurre en Chile es que existe la creencia muy difundida de que basta ir a una charla, a un encuentro como este, y ya vamos a poner en marcha la psicología positiva en nuestras instituciones. Entonces, ¿cuáles son las claves más importantes para poder impulsar la psicología positiva dentro de las organizaciones educativas?
Thank you. Would you like me to answer that, Sophia? Is that?
Yes, yes.
Yes, great. Thank you. It's a great question, Claudia. It is, Claudio, it is the, I think the most important question of all you're asking is how do we start and how do we get buy-in from the schools? I think what we have learned is this. Firstly, we need to create a narrative. I mean, I think the question I had on the screen earlier is, what is the purpose of school? And every teacher in the world, every educator, every leader in a school has a story they will tell you about why do schools exist? What is the purpose? That narrative is fundamental to the success of wellbeing science. If the narrative is the purpose of school is to get students into university, if that is their narrative, then wellbeing science will not succeed. Positive education will not succeed. We have to ask, what is really being valued by the school? So if the narrative is about university entrance, or if the narrative is a kind of economic rationalist argument, that really schools are designed to teach students skills so that they can contribute to a powerful economy, so that they can help grow the Chilean economy, if that's what schools are for, wellbeing will never succeed. Positive education will never succeed. So the first step in the success of wellbeing science, positive education, is to make sure that the narrative, the story about schooling is right. We have to sell the message. We have to ensure that educators, teachers, parents, principals appreciate that schools, the number one purpose of a school is to create students that can help make our world a better, more beautiful, more tolerant place. Surely that's what schools are for, to help bring our species forward, to help move us towards those United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And once you have parents, the principal of the school, head of school, teachers, appreciating that narrative, then we have the opportunity to embed wellbeing science. And as we've seen in the last 10 years, Claudio, you know, I've worked with over 1,000 schools. I think maybe 200 of them have failed with positive education. And it always fails because one of 4 reasons. There's 4 reasons why positive education fails or succeeds. Firstly, we need to learn the wellbeing science. It starts with teachers, parents, educators, school leaders, learning, the adults, learning wellbeing science. Because as you know, Claudio, this is hard. Like everyone knows kind of about perseverance, but do you really know the science of grit? And everyone's kind of heard of growth mindset, but have you read the latest meta-analyses that show it doesn't work in most, like, are you really reading the science? Do you really know it well? So one problem is that schools don't take the time to learn the wellbeing science enough. So that's the first problem. That's not a problem or a success point. It's a pivot point for success or failure. The second pivot point is living it. So learn, then live. Are the teachers, the adults, empowered to live well-being? Because as any educator will tell you, you know, students learn by copying. You know, we're designed as a species to imitate adults. Children are designed to imitate adults, right? And so if we're not living well-being, if we're not embracing wellbeing science, then positive education will fail. And I've worked with many schools where the school claims to be a positive education school, but the principal is a very ungrateful, unkind idiot. And so positive education will fail in that environment if we're not role modeling well-being as well. So learn, then live, then teach it. And it's got to be taught well to students. You know, what I've seen, and it's sad, but what I've seen is that positive education can do harm. Positive education can do harm. When we teach well-being poorly, then we can actually do harm to well-being. You know, I've sat in gratitude lessons in Adelaide, in South Australia. I sat in and watched a teacher teach a lesson on gratitude, and it was with a group of year 8th grade boys. And it was a very well-designed lesson, a nice little YouTube clip at the start, and then the students had to write a gratitude letter to their parent. But it was being taught by a mean, rude, middle-aged male maths geography well-being teacher who was not role modeling well-being. And the boys left that class joking about gratitude, thinking it was stupid. I've seen many teachers teach mindfulness poorly. We had a whole cohort of students at Geelong Grammar School who think mindfulness is stupid because we didn't teach it very well. So we actually did harm to well-being, I think, by teaching well-being poorly, right? In the same way that you can do harm to math. If you have a terrible math teacher, like I had in 9th grade, you can do harm to a child's maths ability. In the same way with well-being. So we have to be learning, we have to get the narrative right first, then learn it, then live it, then teach it really well, and then embed it into the framework of the school, the fundamental policies and procedures of a school. And when we do that, then we have this ecosystem, this well-being ecosystem that optimizes the well-being of the child because the environment is right. So it is about narrative and environment first, and then the teaching thing comes second, it comes third, comes fourth, it's way down the track. First, we've got to start with teachers, the environment, and then the teaching can come. So I think probably that's how I'd answer the question, Claudio.
Perdón. Ana María, tu turno.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Gracias a Claudio y a David. Yo, bueno, primero solo estar súper como conectada con lo que ambos plantean. Creo que también es un tema que es muy estructural, porque estamos hablando del bienestar y de la psicología positiva, pero si uno lo ve desde la educación, tiene que ver como con toda esta ola o visión de una educación transformadora que finalmente pone al ser humano integral en la mitad. Y eso es algo que lo hemos escuchado por décadas, pero quizás ahora, por la pandemia, por una situación tan como de quiebre, se ha vuelto súper evidente, y eso es como la parte positiva de este momento tan difícil. Si además vemos que, no sé, ayer salía una estadística que la pérdida de aprendizaje en Latinoamérica podría llegar hasta el 80%, comparado con un año normal, pero coincido también en que regresar a hacer exactamente lo mismo que hacíamos antes no va a reducir esa brecha, sino que la va a ampliar. Entonces, habiendo dicho eso, porque en Latinoamérica de todas maneras el eje de que lo que hagamos tiene que ser equitativo e inclusivo, vivimos en una sociedad en donde las oportunidades no se distribuyen de manera igual, sí las capacidades, porque un niño que puede estar en una zona de mayor vulnerabilidad y otras tienen las capacidades para crecer, y ahí la mentalidad de crecimiento, las altas expectativas, el carácter, es lo que nos permite de alguna manera dar ese paso importante. Entonces, quería preguntarle a David específicamente sobre cómo ves tú que esta mirada educativa finalmente está al servicio de mayor inclusión, de mejores oportunidades, porque lo que ha solido pasar es una desconfianza frente a estas tendencias. Es como la educación del siglo XXI, las habilidades más mal llamadas blandas, son para ciertas situaciones y para niños y niñas que ya tienen resuelto lo básico, y todo lo que ustedes dicen va como al lado contrario, que además me parece que es lo correcto. Entonces, ¿cómo tú explicas y qué es lo que la evidencia dice con respecto a esta psicología positiva, esta mentalidad de crecimiento, con respecto a su impacto en la equidad?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Thank you, Anna. And we're unfortunately, I think we need help from foundations like yours. I think if I'm really honest, when I'm being really honest, Anna, I think what I have seen, and I've been around the world and worked with schools in sub-Saharan Africa and, the most elite schools in the world in the US and Hong Kong. And, so I've seen the spectrum of what works. And I understand the education landscape in a whole range of different areas. I think if I'm being really honest, Anna, I've only seen the impact really of positive education, largely in kind of wealthier schools that have capacity to deliver training to staff, that have access to sophisticated technologies to, for example, at Geelong Grammar, with students are being trained in wearing virtual reality goggles in kind of stress inoculation kind of approaches to, so we're using technology to help with wellbeing. There's a lot of money there to fund training and research. But in many schools across the world, but particularly in the US and Latin America, there's a disproportionate, there's an unfair distribution of the impact of positive psychology. So I've seen that and I recognize that. I've also seen, on the other hand, my favorite case study of positive education is in a school in South Australia, a state of South Australia in Australia. It's called Mark Oliphant College. It's a Category 1 school in Australia, which means it's the poorest, lowest socioeconomic status of any school in Australia. And they had no money. And their wellbeing, their positive education program that we helped them build cost $20. They put a sticker in their reception for when their parents arrived. They put a sticker of a tree, a gratitude tree. And the parents who used to be very angry about the school and complain a lot, the parents were still allowed to complain, but they had to write something they were grateful for in their child, put it on the tree before they were allowed to complain to the principal. And that started a whole chain of events that led to Mark Oliphant College radically shifting. 5 years ago, they had a 50% completion rate at the end of high school. Only 50% of their high school students were completing. 2 years ago, they had a 100% completion rate. Positive education had radically transformed one of the poorest, lowest socioeconomic schools in Australia. And that occurred because of the narrative that I spoke about earlier. You know, positive education ultimately is a belief, like it's a philosophy that says well-being matters first, that academic learning, that comes second. You know, that's what positive education says. There is nothing more important than the well-being of a child. And when you have that narrative, that story, that doesn't cost anything. That's free. But that causes a change in behaviors that downstream impact the child, right? So I've seen positive education work across the whole spectrum of schools. I think where we need your help is to leverage digital technologies better. We need to create scalable solutions that impact at scale. And that's one of the work that I'm doing at VIII at the moment, is trying to create an example of a massively scalable wellbeing solution that says, here, we can put students in front of world-class teaching on a computer screen and teach them in their own individualized learning setting, expansive skills around well-being without needing to train teachers. Like, we're testing that as a concept, but we need to leverage digital technologies to get this equity involved. But again, it starts with the narrative. We've got to get that right first. We have to make sure schools believe that well-being is the number one priority. And we're seeing that. And I think the pandemic has helped, because high stakes testing is being deleted. It's being removed across school systems around the world. It's disappearing in the US, or it's gone in the US. SAT testing gone last year. So every Ivy League university in the States, there's no standardized testing last year, right? It's going in the UK. It's going in Australia. So what's driving schools, the primary motivation about tests and scores, that's disappearing. And so I think we do have the opportunity for a new narrative that doesn't cost anything, that can be delivered, but the skills and knowledge, that needs technology, I think.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Tomás pidió la palabra.
Muchas gracias, David. Muchísimas gracias por la presentación, muy interesante en muchos aspectos. Y mi pregunta va específicamente a algo que tú dijiste, que es, finalmente, la implementación es muy importante, y dentro de eso las profesoras, los profesores son muy importantes. Entonces, te quería preguntar, ¿cómo te ha ido con escuelas de educación, con teaching schools? Porque es muy difícil promover esto si las escuelas de formación de profesores no lo están promoviendo, o de cierta manera no lo incorporan. ¿Cuál ha sido tu experiencia en eso?
Yeah, I think, Thomas, what I've seen, thank you for the question. What I've seen is that parents and teachers are the most important part of this puzzle. I think parents are important because they need to be on the journey with us. But parents innately care about the child. The number one job of any parent is to care for the child's well-being. For a teacher, it's confusing. The teacher, what is the teacher's job? Is the teacher's job to teach algebra, or is the teacher's job to teach kindness and contribution and meaning and purpose? A teacher kind of has this dual role. And what I've seen is this, and this is something that Marty Seligman and I have argument about, actually. I think I've always believed, and I firmly believe, and you know, my new book is about this as well, that positive education, wellbeing science is most successful when we empower the teacher first, when the teacher is trained in the skills and knowledge of wellbeing, when they believe in it, when their narrative is aligned with their story about why schools exist is about well-being. It's about meaning and purpose, contribution, kindness, or forgiveness. When the narrative is aligned, when they're trained in wellbeing science, when they teach with wellbeing science, when their pedagogy is affected by wellbeing science, that's when we have the biggest impact. Now, I've taught the Penn Resiliency program that Claudio mentioned. It's okay, it's fine. You know, Geelong Grammar has a 500 lesson K through 12 curriculum called Peak. It's okay, it's nice. But as you saw in that graph, Thomas, the curriculum has no impact if the teacher is rubbish, if the teacher is poor, if the teacher is not good, the curriculum has no impact. And so this whole field of science hinges on the teacher, Because this is another mistake that we sometimes make, is we think that government, you know, I think Anna made the point maybe about a systems level thinking. We do have to have systems involved. We have to have government, we have to have policy. But ultimately, Thomas, as you know, well-being doesn't occur in a policy document. It doesn't occur in funding. It doesn't occur at the United Nations. It doesn't occur at BHP Foundation. Well-being occurs in the beautiful space, the sacred space between an educator and a child. That's where well-being occurs. And if we don't get that space right, that beautiful space, this whole field is a waste of time. Seligman's whole life work, a waste of time if we don't get that beautiful sacred space right. And I think that's my absolute passion, is about empowering the teacher to get that beautiful space, to create that environment around the child where every interaction matters. And that's hard. And that is not an easy solution, but that's where we've seen the most success and where we've seen the most failure, when we get that little bit right or wrong.
Thank you, David. Makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Thomas.
Estamos ya un poco sobre la hora, ¿no?
Sí, quedan unos 5 minutitos. Quería hacer una última pregunta sobre este tema de que en el fondo has dado muchos ejemplos de que el profesor tiene que ser bueno, el profesor tiene que estimular, y uno se acuerda también de los profesores que a uno le enseñaron el amor por aprender, que hablabas tú antes, y otros que también lo mencionaste, más bien lo aplastan. Entonces, ¿cómo se hace para que teachers have what it takes? No sé cómo decir eso en español.
Yeah, it's a good question. I believe I have a very optimistic perception of teachers around the world. This book, which is called 10 Things Schools Get Wrong, the very first line in the book, the very first sentence in the book is, education is not broken. So the book's called 10 Things Schools Get Wrong, but the first line is, education is not broken. What I see in every school I go to, anywhere in the world, is that 99% of what I see is amazing work. Teachers are highly skilled, they're highly trained, they're hugely impactful, they're committed. They've chosen this profession not for fame or fortune, but they choose this profession because they want to guide the next generation. They want to nurture the lives of children. They are passionately committed, and they're very, very good at their craft. That's what I see 99% of the time. I think the education system around the world is working well. We have more women being educated than ever before. We have more empowerment of low socioeconomic areas than ever before. We have increasing rates of reading and writing around the world. We have decreasing poverty rates caused by increased employability because of skills. The education system is working really well. It's not perfect, but it's working really well, right? And teachers are doing an incredible job. I think, and it's not every teacher, and it's not every school, but mostly that's true. I think what needs to change is not much, actually. I think what we're suggesting here and what we've written about in the book is that it starts with, and I think COVID's been helpful in this, the pandemic's been helpful. It starts with a change in narrative, the change in that question of why are we doing schooling, right? I think that's the only question we need to create time and space to ask. What is the purpose of school today? Why are we doing this job? Why are we bringing hundreds of millions of students to little schools around the world every day? You know, there are 5 million schools around the world. It's the biggest logistical exercise on the planet. It's far bigger than any military exercise. Like every day we bring millions of people into these little organizations, right? Why are we doing that? And when we create time and space for educators to answer that question, they all answer the same way. They all say, because we want to guide and nurture the next generation. You know, schools are really about, it's a little village, right? It's going back to caveman times. Really, schools are about people coming together to learn, to share wisdom. And unfortunately, we've lost track a bit. You know, we've got caught up in high stakes academic testing and university entrance being dominant narrative, or economic rationalist arguments. But when we create time and space for that question, why are we doing this? And then when we enable the system to serve that function, right? then that's all I think we need to do, because I think teachers know about well-being. They don't know all the science, but once they're on board, once they believe in a new narrative, once they have a new why, the science is really easy to learn. That's the easy bit. But I think the shift is about changing this story about what is the purpose of schooling, right? So that's probably how I'd answer that question. And we're trying to create space in schools. Like in schools we're working with at the moment, Sophia, we're literally creating space. I go into schools, and for 2 hours we have that discussion of, why are you here? Why does your school exist? What are we doing this for? And when you allow teachers just to take a breath, to stop for a second, their shoulders go, oh, yeah, that's it. And they remember why they chose this profession. That's the catalyst. And that's really interesting because it's ground up. Like, of course, we need government and policy, but we're also seeing this groundswell of teachers, upwards pressure from the ground up, where teachers are causing a change in schools that's putting pressure in. I'm seeing this in Victoria, in the state of Victoria in Australia, where wellbeing teachers are putting pressure on the government. And now the government's funding huge influx of money coming into Melbourne, Victoria, about 2 weeks ago, because of pressure from teachers. Like, teachers are asking this question, they're changing the story, putting pressure on government. So I think, yeah, this is about systems, but it is also about enabling the groundswell, the grassroots level of teachers to recognize that they are highly trained professionals, that their job is to craft the next generation of children. That's what their job, teachers don't make things, right? Educators don't make cars, we don't make widgets, we don't make houses. But what educators do is they make minds. They literally make minds. They are making the minds of the next generation. And when teachers recognize that role they play is the most important job in the world, and that they are the most highly trained professionals on the planet at that craft, then we start to realize their obligation elevates, their professionalism elevates, and they recognize that well-being matters more than anything else. That's their primary job. And so I think it is about this conversation, this narrative creating space, and we're seeing that shift occur. So I'm excited about where this is going, Sophia, and I hope that you guys can help with this story. And I know you guys are doing some awesome work in this field. So thank you for all the work you're doing.
Muchas gracias, David. Vamos a dar una última pregunta a Paulina y ahí ya cerramos.
Sí, gracias. Sí, sé que estamos en el tiempo. Bueno, primero quería agradecer a David por esta presentación, por invitarnos a reflexionar sobre el propósito de los colegios, por poder visualizar la importancia del rol de los docentes. Por lo general, cuando trabajamos en Chile, estas iniciativas y queremos trabajar cómo vamos a promover el bienestar, tanto me ha pasado en colegios públicos como en colegios particulares y particular subvencionados, que me preguntan los directivos, como, ¿por dónde comenzamos, Paulina? Tenemos que tener una línea estratégica, tenemos que comenzar entrenando a los docentes, tenemos que hacer jornadas de autocuidado. Entonces, mi pregunta va en esa línea. Por lo general, los colegios acá en Chile nos dicen, no tenemos tiempo. No tenemos tiempo para poder trabajar el bienestar. No tenemos espacio. ¿Dónde? Entonces, ¿cómo sugieres tú que podrían comenzar? Nos preguntan, ¿cómo podemos comenzar si queremos trabajar y podemos como constituirnos como un colegio que tiene en el centro el bienestar?
Yeah, I think the starting point is the conversation, Paulina. I think it is the starting point, and that question at Seligman, the very first slide I showed you guys, the Seligman asking Stephen Meek that question, what do you most want for your students? That's the question. I mean, it has to start with questions. I think I love the coaching approach to psychology and positive psychology, allowing people to come to the realization themselves. And I think that's the question. That's your job, Paulina. That's our job collectively on this call, is to ask questions like, what do you most want for your students? What is the purpose of your school? What really is success? What legacy do you want to leave? So I think it starts with those questions, right? And then once you have that catalyst, that starting point, then I think it opens teachers' hearts and minds to the possibility. And so I think having those conversations and then allowing teachers to see the resources that are available. There's so many amazing resources free on TED Talks and books that are available and conversations that are available for teachers to see that their role is different to just teaching math. And then, the Learn, Live, Teach, Embed framework is what we've seen a lot of success in. It's what we're working with in schools, in individual classrooms, but also in whole government systems, like in the UAE, where we've embedded that whole approach of learn, live, teach, embed. Empower the teachers, then allow them to live it, allow them to be well, and then create a cool curriculum and then embed it in the policy. So the learn, live, teach, embed framework is kind of the overarching belief philosophy that I think works, but it's got to start with those early conversations about, allowing teachers, to educators, leaders, governments to come to the recognition that schools are not to teach maths. Schools are to teach humans, to create the next generation of humans in Chile and around the world. So hope that answers your question, Paulina. And I just wanted to invite anyone to keep in touch. Please keep in touch if I can help in any way. I'd love to support the work you're doing. And thank you again to Paulina for all your work. You're doing amazing stuff.
Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Namaste a Claudio también. La verdad es que no sé cómo se sentirán ustedes, pero a mí me ha emocionado mucho esta conversación. De verdad que va a lo profundo de lo que hemos conversado durante todo este año con este grupo maravilloso de profesionales que viven por la educación, viven por transformar el sistema educativo y hacer el aprendizaje algo concreto y real para nuestros niños y nuestros jóvenes. La pandemia ha cambiado muchas cosas, pero yo creo que una buena cosa es que ha cambiado nuestras prioridades, nos ha alejado del correr, del éxito, del trabajo, de las buenas notas a los niños y nos ha llevado a preocuparnos en las personas, en el centro de la persona, su bienestar, como hablas tú. Y queremos que nuestros niños estén bien, queremos que nuestros niños disfruten del aprender, del educarse, que realmente sientan que cada uno de ellos, con sus 800 trillones de diferencia, como nos comentaban, con esa única diferencia que los hace únicos y especiales, pueden contribuir a la sociedad. Ana María, te veo. Ana María, ¿te ves?
Sorry.
No hay problema. Pero le estaba contando, agradeciendo a David y a Claudio por esta inspiradora conversación del día de hoy y toda la razón, no podemos volver atrás, no queremos volver atrás. Incluso me queda con la idea, me inquieta la idea que, claro, hasta la escuela misma puede quedar obsoleta si no satisface las necesidades de las personas hoy en este mundo tan cambiante y lleno de incertidumbre. Entonces, tenemos ahí un desafío muy interesante los que estamos trabajando en este tema de la educación y del aprendizaje del siglo XXI para ir adaptándonos y para ir integrando todos estos recursos al modelo de hoy y del futuro. Así que otra vez muchas gracias a Claudio, muchas gracias a David. Ojalá pueda ir a Melbourne otra vez, una linda ciudad, muy buen café. No comí canguro, pero sí tomo café en Melbourne, así que un abrazo grande para todos. Canguro no.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Alejandra. Please do keep in touch and please do come visit one day. Thank you. Good luck with all of your work.
Gracias a todos por acompañarnos.
Gracias.
Su tiempo es valiosísimo, así que les agradecemos mucho habernos acompañado y ojalá que hayan salido tan emocionados e inspirados como nosotros. Un abrazo grande.
Muy bien. Gracias, Sofía. Gracias, Alejandra.
Chao a todos.
Un agrado estar aquí.
Gracias.
Nos vemos. Gracias.
Chau.
Chau.